Good day, everyone, and welcome to the United Nations Foundation UNA USA Advocacy Call on Climate. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to Rachel Pittman, Senior Director of Membership and Programs at UNA USA. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the UNA USA National Call on Combating Climate Change under the Trump administration. Today's call will address how the administration has made decisions that threaten the health of our planet, such as proposed cuts in U.S. funding for UN climate change programs, an executive order that rolls back regulations on greenhouse gas emissions, and the potential withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. As concerned citizens, we must be fully aware of these impacts and how we can make our concerns known. Therefore, I would like to introduce you to Kaylee Kreider, our guest speaker for today. Ms. Kreider is currently the Special Advisor for Climate Science at the UN Foundation. She has 20 years of public relations, marketing, and policy experience, specializing in the environment, technology, sustainable business, the media, and politics. Prior to her role at the UN Foundation, she worked for nearly 7 years as environmental advisor and communications director for the former Vice President Al Gore, where she helped in the research and marketing of 3 best-selling books, an Oscar award-winning film, and a top-selling app for the iPhone and iPad. Kaylee worked as a spokesperson and managed a broad communications portfolio in liaising with executives at Apple, Google, Current, Generation Investment Management, and Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers. Kaylee also assisted with a slideshow that served as the basis for an inconvenient truth. Kaylee, thank you so much for joining us today, and I welcome you to give remarks on these very important climate issues.
Well, thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate it, and thanks for all that you do. And it's kind of an incredible day. I don't know how many of you live in the East, but a lot of us just spent Passover and Easter with 85-degree temperatures in April, which is not something that many of us are used to. And I think, we've all been seeing some major changes in this early part of the Trump administration on a wide variety of issues that we care a great deal about, whether that's immigration, or other really important issues, funding for a wide range of issues like the United Nations. And I'm here to talk about climate change. But I guess the first thing I just want to say is that so many of these issues are deeply intertwined, as we see from the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so while I am going to talk about climate change, there's no doubt that all of these issues are important and interwoven, and your voice on them is just so important. In December of 2015, over 190 nations got together in Paris to negotiate an accord called the Paris Agreement. And it was an incredible gathering. I was honored to be there, as well as a number of my colleagues from the United Nations Foundation. And it was the largest single gathering of heads of state under one roof in one day in history. And I can tell you that it was kind of a shock heard around the world of a signal of the importance of climate change. That agreement had a number of really important provisions in it to try to help the world to reduce the pollution that causes climate change. I think, as many of you know, comes from the burning of coal, oil, and gas, but also from things like burning down our forests, right? So it's not only from the burning of fossil fuels, but it's also from doing things that degrade the land. In that agreement, nations agreed to try to limit the global average temperature to below 2 degrees centigrade. And why that matters is that both how quickly we warm the Earth, as well as the overall temperature increase matters. Just as when you're sick and you have a temperature, right, it doesn't seem like the difference between, 98.6 and 100 degrees temperature matters all that much. Small changes in temperature can have really big impacts on a biological system, whether that's your own body or whether that's the planet. And so governments around the world agreed to try to make sure that the pollution that causes global warming would peak as soon as possible and then to try to limit that pollution and to take what they call a stock take, but to look every 5 years, starting in 2023, at the types of pollution they're emitting, so that each country submitted a commitment to how much pollution they were going to limit, and then every 5 years to try to ratchet that down even further. Here in the United States, President Obama put together a climate change action plan that had a whole range of activities. It had looked at power plants and vehicles and energy efficiency standards across the board. And so we were kind of coming out of Paris with a lot of momentum. Of course, then what's happened is we've had an election in the United States, and the Trump administration is trying to reverse some of what the Obama administration has done. Before I go into that, I just want to say that many, many countries are absolutely moving forward with their commitments. Even though they know that the Trump administration is going to try to reverse some of that legacy, the Paris Agreement moves on. So far, under the new administration, President Trump has already issued an executive order, and under that executive order, he has pledged that he's going to try to repeal and rework the Clean Power Plan. And that is the area of work on electric utilities. So that's how we get our power from power plants in many parts of the country. Notwithstanding the fact that many people are now getting their power from renewable energy. They've also signaled that they're going to try to roll back the new standards for fuel economy. You've probably noticed now that there are a lot more hybrids on the road. There are a lot more electric vehicles on the road. Some of you probably own some of those. And some of the reason for that is that both the state of California and the federal government put into place in President Obama's first term some really new and aggressive plans for fuel economy of vehicles. And the Trump administration is going to try to roll some of those back. Now, I'll say that it took in some of these cases 8 years to put those rules in place. The environmental community is absolutely pledged to try to defend those rules in the courts, and it remains to be seen how much of these executive orders and rollbacks will actually happen, especially if the Trump administration is in place for 4 years. And then the second thing I'll say about that is a lot of people are really opposed to these rollbacks. And the more that voices are heard opposing that, whether it's from the industry, and you'd be surprised actually how many around the world have, and in the United States, have actually opposed rolling back these standards because they're actually quite popular. People like having more efficient vehicles. They like having access to renewable power. You'd actually find it to be surprising how much support some of these rules actually have. We'll actually see how much is actually undone. In sort of the latest news, it appears that there's going to be a big meeting at the White House tomorrow to talk about whether or not the United States is going to remain in this Paris Agreement. So all these domestic actions in the United States were going to be sort of our domestic plan to stay in the Paris Agreement. And right now they're planning on it being sort of a high-level meeting with stakeholders across the government. So from the Environmental Protection Agency, from the Department of Energy, so a number of people from the relevant agencies, from the State Department, from the National Security Council, to have the kind of broad conversation about should the U.S. stay in the Paris Agreement? What are the pluses and minuses of that? If we stayed in, would we negotiate a lower commitment? If we left, what would be the response of our allies around the world? Some of you may remember that when President Bush was in office, we had signed the Kyoto Protocol, And when the U.S. withdrew from that, it was a climate agreement. When the U.S. decided to withdraw from that, there was a huge diplomatic blowback. And so there have been a number of Republicans, actually, on Capitol Hill at Congress, and from President Bush's administration, who said, look, we probably shouldn't have withdrawn from the climate agreement back in 2001, and because it matters so much to our allies around the world. So they're going to go through the pluses and the minuses, and we don't know what, if anything, we might hear out of that meeting. What they've promised is that they will have an announcement by an international meeting at the end of May. But, you know, the real question is, what does all this mean, right? What does it mean that President Trump has committed to rolling back President Obama's climate change action plan? What would it mean if we stayed in the Paris Agreement with a weakened goal or we pulled out? And I guess that's the nub of what I wanted to get to today. There's no doubt that climate change is something that is not just a threat because trapping more heat closer to the Earth can cause more extreme weather, heat waves, wildfires, storms, or floods. But it's because it's something that affects everyone. You know, a lot of times you hear, oh, this is something that can affect people in areas in the developing world or in the global south. And that is indeed true. You look at a place like Bangladesh where you have 1 million people that live right at sea level. And if you were to have sea level rise of 3 feet, a meter, you could displace 1 million people. And 1 meter sea level rise is projected to happen in this century. Now imagine if you displace 1 million people out of Bangladesh. We're having political disruption because of what's happening in Syria over far smaller numbers. And so if you have a refugee crisis because of what's perceived as an environmental issue like climate change that displaces 1 million people from just one country, you start to get an idea of what the real type of threat is from climate change. But really anybody can be an environmental refugee. And I say that because no country is really prepared. Look at Superstorm Sandy. It hit arguably the wealthiest country in the wealthiest city in the world, New York City and New Jersey. And they were completely unprepared. Or you look at New Orleans, right? A city in the United States also caught completely unprepared. And climate change, because of how it warms waters, can help cause storms to be either stronger or longer lasting. And so my point is this. We're used to living in a climate and a certain balance. We built our cities and our countries where they are based on a climate as it was, not how it is going to be. And so the reason this matters is if we don't aggressively cut the pollution that causes it, we're going to build into this system so much temperature change that we're going to have a very difficult time both adapting to kind of the slow catastrophes like sea level rise or the fast catastrophes like extreme weather that is going to cause a type of human misery that's not going to matter about the wealth of the country that it hits. And that's why the actions of the United States matter. As I think you all know from other calls, how and what the United States acts really does matter. You know, we fund upwards of almost 40% of what the United Nations does. We have a diplomatic reach and power that helps to not only negotiate these treaties, but to help them be implemented. And so we need voices like yours to both to understand these issues and to help speak out on these issues, because we've already seen the Trump administration flip-flop on very important issues, right? NATO was obsolete, and now it matters. We had that first executive order on immigration, and they had to pull it out. They were going to repeal Obamacare, and they haven't been able to do it. And so it is not preordained that this administration is going to be able to pull the rug out on the Earth's climate. And it's up to people like us to help put this issue on the radar screen and to keep it on the radar screen so that we can stop the worst from happening. And so I feel very lucky to have the chance to talk to you all today, and I'd love to ask my colleagues if they have anything they'd like to add about how you can help, and then take any questions that would, help you to learn anything more about it or to clarify anything that I've said.
Great. Thank you so much. And before we get into how UNA USA members can help, I actually would like, Kaylee, to open the floor and first get some questions from our members. So operator, if you can assist our membership on how to ask questions, I would appreciate it.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment at this time, please signal us by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. If you are using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. Once again, that's *1 to ask a question. And we'll pause for just a moment to allow everyone an opportunity to signal for questions. We'll take our first question from Mary Steiner in San Francisco.
Hello, everyone. Yes. San Francisco is co-sponsoring an event with the Canadian Consulate. The Canadian government this year is in charge of World Environment Day, June 5th. And we're looking at what California can do. California has the Under 2 MOU campaign going, which is to reduce our global warming by 2 degrees, and to sign memorandums of understanding with other states, other subnational organizations such as Scotland. So wondering how the California delegation or Californians can cooperate with what's going on nationally, and if National is aware of this effort.
So I'll start with the California piece, which is that, first of all, thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll say is, it's incredible. And look, California is now the 6th largest economy in the world, if it were a country. I think you all moved ahead of the UK thanks to Brexit, hurting the UK economy. And your governor has taken some incredible steps to challenge the Trump administration to make sure that the state of California can continue to be a leader on fuel economy, regulating CO2, and continuing to be a leader on renewable power. So I think one thing is to, because I think California is going to continue to lead the charge as an economic powerhouse, and the governor is trying to also kind of lead the charge among other states, because when the federal government falls down on issues, which it has before, not just on climate, but on other issues, the states tend to pick up the banner and lead, and then sometimes can help to leverage the federal government to do the right thing. And we've seen that most recently, I think you would say, on gay marriage, right, where the states kind of took charge, and then the courts after that. So I would say this. First of all, help California to continue to take the lead across the country I believe that Governor Brown is going to try to host a major conference later this year to bring in Washington, Oregon, and other states on carbon pricing and other issues. The second thing that's been incredible that's coming out of California, although it's not government-led, is that you've probably seen that Google is now the #1 company purchasing renewable power, but Apple and others are starting to catch up, but you're even seeing it outside of the tech industry now. And I think the more that we get companies making large purchase agreements of renewable power, it helps to build that market. And that's an incredible signal to the administration. I mean, even Dow Chemical now, right? It's not just the tech industry anymore. And I don't say that to dismiss the tech industry, but I'm saying the more and different kinds of companies, whether it's Walmart or Dow Chemical or Apple or Google, as these large companies are hearing from consumers that they should be buying renewable power, it helps to build that market and sends an undeniable signal of the direction that the country could and is moving in. And that has begun, but not been limited to California. And so that kind of pole position and leadership begins, it's like what happens in California doesn't stay in California, right? And that really does matter, that kind of amplification effect, and it does matter because of the size of the economy there.
Great. And Mary, I will also add that I know that there will be several chapters engaging in different activities over the month. And so I would love for those chapters or even individuals to send us an email to membership@UNA USA so that we too are aware of what you're doing on climate action. And operator, if we can take the next call. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, we'll take our next question from Mel Boynton with the Pomona Valley, California chapter.
Hi, Kayleigh. Thank you for this wonderful talk, and also Rachel for being our fearless leader. I was a part of several advocacy actions in the last few weeks, as were many of our members around the country. And I think maybe our toughest mission is not to thank our friends and to tell our opponents that they ought to think again. I think perhaps it's those people in the middle who feel part of their constituency is for this, part of it's against it. Could you give us maybe the 3 best points to take those members of Congress and the Senate that are leaning? They could go either way. What are the top 3 maybe business-oriented or America First kind of thoughts that maybe those people would like to hear? Thank you.
So it's a great question, and I spend a lot of time actually in the South. I moved to Tennessee to work for the Gores and still have a farm there, and I can tell you that it's difficult to report this, but every one of my neighbors voted for Donald Trump. So I'm familiar, and they're not uneducated people. One of them is a veterinarian. These are not uneducated people. So I'll give a stab at 3 things. The first thing I'll say is this: is that for those who have businesses, the first thing I'll say is that businesses need certainty, and that the reason that you are seeing so many companies come out, even most recently a coal company come out in favor of the Paris Agreement, is that you have now finally seen businesses in every spectrum, like whether that's chemicals, oil, gas, even a coal company, they want and need some sense of long-term certainty. And that's what they get from the Paris Agreement. Believe it or not, that's what they've been getting from the fuel economy rule, they actually do want rules of the road that are certain, and that although there are certain lobbying groups that have been pushing the Trump administration in this direction or that, having some amount of certainty and rules of the road that are international and clear, because more and more companies now are in fact multinational, right? They're not just based in the United States. Having that international certainty is something that businesses want. The second thing I'll say that I say to folks that are more middle of the road, so this goes for whether it's Lamar Alexander or Bob Corker, who are two Republican senators in Tennessee. In many cases, like fuel economy, like power plants, like methane, which as many of you know can be released with natural gas, with fracking for natural gas, you would do the same things that you would do to protect the climate as you would do on clean air. And many Republican members, but not solely Republican, you have fracking in California, for example. But you would take the same measures to protect our air as you would to protect the climate, because you have conventional air pollutants, the stuff that causes soot and smog, at the same time as you're releasing CO2. And so while many of us are concerned about, emissions of CO2, you're also concerned about the things that cause dirty air. So whether you're in Los Angeles or you're in Nashville or you're in Atlanta, or you're in New York City, you're concerned about clean air too. And then the last thing that I would say is that, and I'll make this specific to the Paris Agreement, one of the real successes of the Paris Agreement was that it was a bottom-up agreement. So what that means is that every country in the world, it did not exclude China, it did not exclude India. This was every single country in the world that participated because they saw that it was actually in their economic interest to participate. And that included the United States, right? The initial agreement was brokered between the U.S. and China, and the rest of the world participated because it was in their bottom-up interest to do so. That's because there are huge new markets. We constructed it based on what was in our economic interest, and that deal came together from the bottom up. Now, the Trump administration is new. They're still getting their footing, but this was a bottom-up deal that came about due to our economic interest. Yes, it absolutely has co-benefits, right, that are great for the climate, that's great for our clean air, that are great for these other things, but it is also rooted in our economic interest, looking at where the markets are going to be. So those would be my big three.
Thank you. And if we can take the next question, please.
Certainly, it's from Rachel Carrillo in Boulder County chapter.
Hi. Thanks for a great presentation, Kaylee. Can you folks hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. We're doing a lot of cool stuff out here in Colorado in the lead into Earth Day and the March on Science. And our chapter has people getting involved. I'll send an email about that. My question is, should this meeting that's tomorrow be considered urgent action for UNA USA members to have some kind of messaging relating to staying in the Paris Agreement? Because I'm thinking it's past 4 p.m. on the East Coast, and is there much that we could do? And I'm asking specifically in the sense of urgency where it concerns this administration moving Dakota Access Pipeline forward and the Keystone XL pipeline forward, despite all the progress and with the water protectors at Standing Rock, and then also looking at the coal moratorium that was basically lifted a couple weeks ago by executive action. So what can we do as UNA USA members, or should we be doing anything in the lead into tomorrow's meeting? And what is tomorrow's meeting specifically? Like, how are they?
So, yeah, Rachel, Kaylee, why don't I start off and then you can add to it. Rachel, just to let you know what we're doing on the UNA USA side, we're going to wait to see what happens in the meeting tomorrow. But just to let you know, we are rolling out a petition. It's a new petition that will focus on climate. And this petition will only last for 2 weeks. We're doing this in conjunction with major organizations that focus or have a big interest in climate. And this petition will be sent to the Trump administration. And then the other thing that we're doing, we're creating these wonderful graphics that we're going to provide to UNA USA members that they can use on social or that they can use to print materials for when they celebrate Earth Day. And also we're going to encourage members to participate in the People's Climate March on Saturday, April 29th. So those are some of the immediate things that you'll see within the next week or two. And then, Kaylee, if you'd like to add to that, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So there's basically a split within the administration about what to do about Paris. I know this shocks you because they seem so organized. So what they're trying to do is have a huddle to bring in sort of a principals level meeting, to bring in the Economic Council Director, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the EPA Administrator, the Energy Secretary, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, to see if they can reach a consensus. The issue is that EPA Administrator Pruitt has been going out publicly and saying we should ditch Paris.
Oh.
But, and we know that Steve Bannon opposes Paris because he opposes all global deals. And he's sort of a nihilist anyway, right? Like, just point blank. But most of the rest of the administration, including Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, the Secretary of State, Rick Perry, the head of the Economic Council, support it. So I think what they're trying to do is a couple, and we have a couple supporters on the National Security Council at the staff level. So I think what they're trying to do is two things. One, stop people from going out in the media and prosecuting the case. And two, see if one side convinces the other. The plus, I guess, if you could say there is one, is that the people who oppose it are not as powerful as they were. And but the minus is that the place doesn't function in the way that previous White Houses did. So we don't actually know how decisions are made in this administration. And frankly, usually early on in an administration, you don't really know how decisions are made anyway. So, and there's a lot of pressure from the right wing to for them to get out. I don't know if you've seen other reports, but like the right wing is really mad that the EPA is not going after the underlying endangerment finding in the Clean Air Act, which was a Supreme Court ruling. So, I'm not convinced that we will actually hear anything out of this meeting because they've said that they're not going to announce anything until late May. So they could all meet and we could hear nothing. They could all meet and say we haven't decided anything. Or they could meet and it could be a leaky sieve. So it's basically, White Houses do this all the time, right? They have high-level meetings on issues to try to hash them out. And because I'm sure they have on North Korea a bunch of times, right? I'm sure they have on Syria a bunch of times. But the purpose of this meeting is to try to hash out disagreements that they have amongst their senior team about whether or not to stay in Paris.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of questions in queue, so I'd like to get to the next person.
And we'll take that next question from Nadwifi Amika with the National Chapter.
Hey guys, what's up? My name's Anna Bisa. I go by Anna. I just want to touch base with you on some things going on since you guys do a lot of climate change activity and things like that. There's a vortexing atmosphere that is not just affecting the United States but many other countries. There's a lot of politics about it and what is causing the chemical reactions in the spaces. They are very destructive when they come through. So as like a chapter in every state, just people be aware of the things taking place in the atmosphere changes and the storms, and also the magnetic field behavior patterns that we live in. Everybody's aware of the second sound congruencies, moving to sound spaces and things like that. Those behavior patterns take place from physics, it's science. There's light speed, sound speed, and then there's a human field in 1 second where you just catch the congruencies and all the symmetry from the light movement in it. But like I said, with the climate change situation, I do believe it is an important issue that needs to be addressed. We're all human through these storms. These things come through across the United States weekly, very destructive, like I stated. People will have different beliefs. It's also gone internationally with the beliefs because, like I stated, the patterns are affecting other nations, and they're interested in the situation, what's taking place, and how the people over here view and believe what's taking place, because how they view is affecting the atmosphere and the way they behave in the atmosphere over there in their time space. So,
great, Kaylee. Do you want to talk a little bit about how how there's an impact globally, not just nationally? Thank you, caller.
Well, so I was lucky enough to work on an Inconvenient Truth, and as part of that, so there's two parts to that, right? First is that, CO2 emitted anywhere affects everybody everywhere, right? Because by trapping the heat close to the Earth's surface, it can affect, if you're melting more ice, let's say in the Arctic, right, it can then go on to affect weather patterns that affect people around the globe. Or, it's a complex system, and yet in some ways it's inherently simple, insofar as that the impact can be really quite profound. But the other piece to it too is that, of course, when the U.S. begins to withdraw from the world, whether that's if we defund the United Nations or we begin to weaken our diplomatic efforts on climate change, that also has ripple effects around the world, because if we're seen as having less of a commitment, then other countries have to step up or step in or step out. And so I say that one of the reasons why I think it's so important for us to have our voices heard is so that governments around the world still see that whether it's state or local or individuals, that they see that we still care, and that whatever is happening here is temporary and not permanent and not necessarily reflective of every American in the United States.
Great, thank you. And can we have our next question, please?
Sure, that'll be from Christy Garnsey in the Puerto Rico chapter.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Yes, my name is Christy, and I don't know if you guys know where's Puerto Rico, but we are located in the Caribbean. We're U.S. territory, okay? Just to clarify, if anyone is affected by climate change, would be us, because we're an island. So mostly our beaches are more like eroded or very strongly eroded, and we depend strongly from tourism. But either way, I don't know if you also know about our economic crisis right now, what we're facing, and I have strong questions about this because we have a very strong culture here for supporting and protecting the environment. So that's a good thing. But there's also, we have power plants here who use energy from coal. So we're having strong issues with that here. But nevertheless, we have other effects of emissions, which those are okay, but I think it's the world impacts of environment which are affecting our beach erosions, and other biodiversity is also affected by climate change. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm very much concerned about Trump's administration. And I find it very hard and very complicated to actually convince these people in Congress to work for us, or at least listen to us. So that's my main concern. So I'm feeling like we have governors from different states who are actually listening to their people, which sounds awesome. Like California and all these other. But I'm really concerned, how are we going to convince these Republicans to listen to us?
Great. Thank you. Kaylee, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I feel your pain deeply. And so I'll say a couple things. First, I've been to Puerto Rico, and it's beautiful. And I'd love to come visit again. The second thing I'll say is that in the international climate talks, the Alliance of Small Island States, which includes countries both in the Pacific and in the Caribbean. Of course, I know that Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but they have actually been a political force that has been incredible as part of the climate talks. You may know that almost single-handedly, the Alliance of Small Island States helped to make the Paris Agreement more ambitious. And I believe that's because, as you have noted, when you live in an island state, you see the impact of climate change more firsthand, and that's because of sea level rise, because of storms. And so and as a result of that, they created a coalition. They pressed much more strongly for a stronger political agreement that included the trying to keep temperatures to 1.5 degrees. It's really been an incredible amount of work, and so to that, I just want to say that it's really been inspiring on the global stage. In terms of U.S. politics, I just want to say this. Look, I worked for the person who came the closest to being president but not being seated president as probably anyone in American history. It was a devastating personal, political moment for me and for him, as you could have, right? I mean, it was a much closer election than what we just had. You know, it's down to less than 500 votes in one state. Change is not linear. It is very difficult to fight for. And I believe that this election was, in fact, a reaction to how much progress was made in 8 years. And it has to be fought for within the democratic process. And we are going to have setbacks. You know, it's not going to happen in one big gulp, right? We're going to make 8 years of progress, and then, you know, we're going to have 4 years of pushback, right? You know, I saw it under Clinton Gore, we made 8 years of progress. We had a tough 8 years of pushback. We made 8 years of progress under Obama. Maybe we have 4 years of pushback, right? That is the nature of democracy, right? It is not one straight line. And that's why we're here on this call, right? It is a tough slog, but I absolutely, positively, 1,000% agree, even after suffering one of the worst political defeats in American history, personally, that we are going to be able to overcome this and move forward. And I believe it because of places like California. I believe it because I see the change in places like China. I believe it because I even see it here in the United States, that we are going to be able to do it. And so I know it is incredibly difficult. I really do. But you look at what's happened on renewable energy in the last 20 years, and it is far faster than we ever could have anticipated. And that has been through Republican and Democratic presidents alike. So they just can't take that away. I promise you.
Thank you. And we only have a little time left, so I would ask the following or the remaining people having questions to just ask a really brief question so we can get to as many people as possible. So next question, please.
Certainly, that's from Douglas Richardson with the Portland chapter.
Yes, thank you. That's Portland, Oregon, to be specific, just so in case someone wonders. Yes, here in Portland, at our chapter, we have basically formed some alliances, you might say, that are both formal and informal. We have alliances with some very environmentally focused organizations that are tied to our sustainability development goals. So we found it very easy and very comfortable to develop those associations. My question is kind of a UNA question. I'll make it quick. It's essentially what opinion might UNA have generally about chapters forming these kinds of alliances with some of these mini organizations focused on climate? There are so many, and some are a bit more locally focused. My hope is that we focus on the international level. And my purpose is to encourage them to think in terms of international. Thank you.
Yes, we definitely encourage UNA chapters to form these alliances and help, like you said, bring individuals in on the global level to help them understand. I mean, this is our way of finding something in common, and then therefore we can then talk about the overall importance of the United Nations. So we definitely encourage chapters to build these alliances. Thank you so much for that question. And I'd like to take the next question, please, operator.
And that'll be from Reena Patel with the Byron Maurer chapter.
Hi. So my name is Reena. I'm with the Bryn Mawr College chapter. My question is kind of around youth engagement with climate change. So a lot of us are entering our junior and senior years, and we're starting to think about how we're going to maybe advocate as like part of our career or as we enter the field. And with climate change, kind of like you mentioned, is affecting a lot of different human rights issues like migration, food scarcity. So what advice do you have for young people who want to advocate for climate change on how they can move forward? Because a lot of the events on campus are around like sustainability lifestyle changes and like a lot of greening campus, but we aren't really talking about the broader implications of climate change. And so we're all wondering what is the most effective way we could do it as the next generation.
It's a great question because I do think that, you know, there are times when it sort of has like a traditional environmental frame, you know, like, and it isn't necessarily always like the most exciting, you know what I mean? Like every generation has to put their stamp, right? So I totally hear you here. I think that, so I'm glad that you're on this call because I think it does have a little bit more of an international take. So I have a couple thoughts. One is, so you're junior, senior, I would definitely, if you can, study abroad or intern abroad or, you know, take that time if you can to work abroad at any point that you possibly can. I think the second is there are a couple of different, NGOs and things that I think, like the UN Foundation, have got a little bit more of the international perspective, and I'm happy to help follow up with you after the call to try to hook you into some of the groups that are doing some more of that international aid and some of that that framing as well that I think might be a little bit more engaging. There's not many outside of the UN Foundation, but there are a few. I think with Earth Day coming up also you're seeing a little bit more of the sort of sustainability framing. But I think once we get past Earth Day, you'll see a little wider. In fact, I even think maybe the People's Climate March will have a little bit more of the broader perspective once we get past Earth Day, which just has its own sort of, certain perspective, right, just because of how it was founded in the United States. So I do think that the People's Climate March, you're also going to see some of that too.
So, thank you. And let's take one last question, please.
Okay, certainly. That'll be from Bob Barnhart in the Great Lansing chapter.
Yes, thank you. Hello, this is Bob Barnhart. My question had been around the meeting in the White House tomorrow, and it's already been addressed, so thank you very much. and I will be sending you information on our Earth Day event here. So wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, why don't we take one more then, operator?
We'll move next to Eleanor May in New York.
Hello? Hi.
Hi, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to say I'm actually going to be as brief as possible, and I'll post the notes I typed up on Wikipedia. So they're on H as in hat, Y as in yes, R as in Robert, O as in Oliver, Y as in yes, A as in all, L as in Lansing. I'll see.
Great. And did you have a question?
I was on behalf of the National Prompt, the UC Bornware Market says thank you for hosting, and I just wanted to say, an inconvenient truth was and is and remains a viable film. But the Gen Remix now, we're looking at data from the British Library, 2011 data. That there's a book that I'll cite on the Wikipedia page that I've been looking at. This really fantastic book about physical geography, and it's 2011 data, and they're claiming things like the troposphere is reported at that time at 6 kilometers altitude over the poles. And then they also are talking about the ice sheet and the initiation of the tectonics in a 3-factor theory, which would be probably of great interest if this isn't data that you've already had brought to your desk in terms
Great.
of
So yeah, definitely if you make those updates and then send them to membership at UNA USA today. So thank you so much. And we could go on and on. We had a lot more questions in queue, but unfortunately we've run out of time. And Kaylee, I just want to thank you so much for, I know things are very busy for you, for taking the time to talk to UNA USA members about the true value of the Paris Agreement and the negative effects on Trump rollbacks. And it was interesting to hear about corporate engagement and also how our voices are very important, and we must speak up and fight back and continue to embrace climate action. So once again, I thank you very much, Kaylee, and I want to remind everyone that once again, we will have a new petition that's coming out that will be climate focused, so we hope everyone participates in it and shares it with their friends and family. And look out for those special graphics. There are a lot of wonderful images that we will provide you. And we hope you do get involved in Earth Day celebrations and participate in the People's Climate March. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules for participating today. And we really appreciate your leadership and your engagement in the United Nations Association of the USA. Thank you, and I hope you all have a good day.
Everyone, that concludes our conference call. Thank you all for your participation. You may now disconnect.